Welcome to the debate. Have you ever practiced the conversation in a new language perfectly in your head, only to have it, completely fall apart the second a real person speaks back to you?
Oh yeah, pretty much every time I travel.
Right. The exact phrasing you rehearse just evaporates. The other person goes off script, and suddenly you're frozen in the checkout line. Today, we're looking at exactly why that happens and whether the instructional models we use are the cure or the disease.
Yeah, and we're looking specifically at an instructional dialogue titled At the Supermarket. It's a short text where two characters, Emma and Daniel, navigate a routine grocery shopping trip, and examining their incredibly brief, honestly entirely seamless trip, well, it brings us to a fascinating question about how we construct foundational models for human interaction.
So, the central question we're debating today is this. Does the highly structured, frictionless dialogue presented in this text serve as an optimal, pragmatic framework for language acquisition? Or does its idealized simplicity create a sterile model that fundamentally fails to prepare the learner for the messy, unpredictable realities of actual human interaction? I will be defending the text today, taking the position that its utilitarian brilliance lies precisely in minimizing cognitive load through predictability, providing a masterful structural scaffold for the learner.
And I will be taking the opposing view. I contend that the text's complete lack of conversational ambiguity constructs a linguistic utopia, devoid of real-world friction, which ultimately leaves the learner equipped with a script that reality will simply refuse to follow.
Okay, let's lay the groundwork by looking at the architecture of the text itself. When I analyze this dialogue between Emma and Daniel, I see a text that succeeds brilliantly precisely because of its structural clarity.
Structural clarity, sure, but
Well, wait, think about it. The authors have systematically isolated the essential conversational nodes of a retail environment. Think about what actually matters when you are trying to survive in a foreign grocery store. You need to locate items, which we see when Emma asks, "Where can we find the milk?"
right, a basic location inquiry.
Exactly. You need to determine price when she asks, "How much are these?" And you need to finalize the transaction. "Can I pay by card?" By deliberately stripping away unnecessary variables like, out-of-stock items, confusing store layouts, or an indecisive shopping partner, the material provides a universally applicable scaffolding. It takes the overwhelming sensory experience of a supermarket and turns it into a manageable linguistic formula.
A manageable formula, sure, I'll give you that, but a deeply deceptive one. While I acknowledge that the target vocabulary highlighted at the end of the text phrases like, "How much is this?" and "Are there any discounts?" Those are functionally indispensable.
Absolutely.
But the underlying framework modeling how these phrases are deployed in the real world is fundamentally flawed. It presents this seamless flow of information that just never exists in reality. Daniel, the shopping partner, knows exactly where everything is instantly. Aisle 5, dairy section.
He's helpful.
He's impossibly helpful. Discounts on fruits and cereals are readily, immediately available. And at the checkout, Emma's request to pay by card is met with an immediate smiling, "Of course," from the cashier.
Right, because the primary objective of a foundational text isn't to simulate the frustration of an inventory shortage, it's to link a linguistic input with a successful output.
But in doing so, you completely strip away the negotiation of meaning. And by negotiation of meaning, I'm referring to the cognitive friction where your brain has to actively repair a misunderstanding.
Okay, but
It's the back and forth, asking for clarification, rephrasing a question, realizing the cashier meant a different aisle, which is the exact mechanism that cements new vocabulary into long-term memory. The text doesn't offer a conversation, it offers a sterilized, deterministic script.
the absence of that cognitive friction is exactly what makes the text work. Let's look at our first major point of contention here, the peer-to-peer informational dynamic between Emma and Daniel.
Okay, let's look at it.
The pedagogical value of how these two interact is immense. The text deliberately sets Emma up as the linguistic proxy for the learner. She's entering the environment with intent but without knowledge. She relies entirely on Daniel for both spatial and economic navigation. She asks about the milk, she asks about the bread, she asks about the discounts.
Right, she asks all the questions.
Yes, and in this micro-environment, Daniel acts as a completely reliable informational anchor. He doesn't just vaguely say the milk is in the store. He places it specifically near the cheese and yogurt. This reliably models the ideal learner-environment relationship.
I have to stop you there. Daniel does not act like a human peer in this dialogue. He functions as an omniscient GPS system.
Oh, come on.
He does. And that's a real problem for the learner's expectations. Think about the physical and social reality of shopping with a friend. It inherently involves shared uncertainty.
Sometimes, sure.
Always. It involves walking down the wrong aisle together, looking at the overhead signs, negotiating the space. I thought the bread was here. Maybe they moved it to the bakery section. That shared uncertainty is where real language happens.
But
The text presents a model where one person possesses exact, flawless knowledge of aisle 5 and the precise sales status of breakfast cereals. How does a model where the interlocutor possesses godlike knowledge of grocery inventory actually help learners navigate situations where the person they are talking to doesn't have all the answers?
well,
When a learner asks a real person, "Where is the milk?" and gets a shrug or a "maybe over there, I don't work here," this text has offered zero preparation for that follow-up negotiation.
but that shared uncertainty, as authentic as it might be, introduces a massive spike in cognitive load. We have to consider how human working memory actually functions during language acquisition.
Okay?
The brain can only hold a few chunks of new information at any given time. If the learner is simultaneously trying to process the target vocabulary words like dairy, aisle, discount, while also processing the language of confusion and hesitation phrases like, "I'm not sure, let's check over there," or maybe their working memory just crashes.
I disagree that it crashes.
The target vocabulary is lost in the noise. Daniel has to be omniscient so that the structural relationship between a where question and a spatial answer remains utterly transparent. The goal is to establish the baseline mechanics of inquiry and response before introducing the noise of human fallibility.
Look, I understand the theory behind reducing cognitive load, but by entirely removing the confusion, you are fundamentally altering what language is. Language is primarily a tool we use to resolve ambiguity.
Sure.
If there is no ambiguity to resolve, if Emma asks what they need and Daniel instantly dictates a definitive, unchangeable list, milk, bread, eggs, and fruit, then language ceases to be a collaborative tool. It becomes a simple information retrieval mechanism. It basically treats human dialogue like a database query. You type in the search term and the database returns the exact location.
And in a transactional environment like a supermarket, a database query is exactly what is required. I mean, this brings us directly to the actual language being deployed, transitioning from the character dynamic to the lexical choices themselves.
Right.
The source material highlights 5 core phrases at the end, and the logical progression of practical economic inquiry demonstrated here is incredibly sophisticated. Look at the sequence with the fruit.
Okay, yeah, the apples.
Emma first asks a macroeconomic question. Are there any discounts today? Daniel confirms there are discounts on fruit. Emma then transitions to a highly specific application, picking up the apples and asking, how much are these?
Right, she moves from the general to the specific.
Exactly. It models perfectly how to move from a macro evaluation of an environment to a micro evaluation of a specific commodity. Think about the cognitive gymnastics required to move from a generalized existential question, are there any discounts, to a specific demonstrative pronoun, how much are these? The text manages to package this highly complex transactional logic into remarkably simple syntax. It's elegant.
It's elegant on the page, sure, but this exact sequence illustrates what I call the vending machine analogy.
The vending machine analogy?
Yeah. The text treats conversational language exactly like a vending machine. You input a specific pre-programmed phrase, like inserting a coin, and you are guaranteed a perfectly positive, frictionless output.
Well,
Emma inputs, "Can I pay by card?" and the machine instantly dispenses, of course, accompanied by a smile. But linguistic inquiry in the real world does not guarantee success. The text conflates knowing the right phrase with a guaranteed successful outcome.
how so? If she uses the right phrase, she gets her answer.
Because the world isn't a vending machine, it's highly conditional. What happens when the learner inputs, "Can I pay by card?" and the cashier replies, "Only on purchases over $5," or "Our machine is down, cash only"?
Okay, but those are...
The text completely ignores the reality of conditional language or complex restrictive responses. When the learner's brain expects a one-to-one input-output ratio and suddenly gets a variable response, that same working memory you mentioned earlier completely crashes. They freeze.
But you are demanding that a foundational model bear the weight of edge cases.
Edge cases?
Yes. If you are teaching someone to drive, you do not start by teaching them how to recover from a hydroplaning skid on an icy highway. You teach them how the steering wheel works in a dry, empty parking lot.
Okay, that's a bit of an exaggeration. The phrase, "Can I pay by card?" paired with, "of course," establishes the standard affirmative paradigm. The learner absolutely must understand the affirmative paradigm before they can even begin to comprehend the vocabulary of friction. If you introduce "our network is down" in their very first supermarket dialogue, you distract entirely from the core transactional vocabulary of paying. Is a broken card reader or a minimum purchase requirement really an edge case, though? I would argue that friction is the default state of human interaction, not the exception. By shielding the learner from any transactional resistance, you aren't just simplifying the vocabulary, you are setting a deeply false psychological expectation.
A false expectation.
Yes, the learner begins to expect that speaking a language correctly means the world will bend to their exact needs. Look at how Emma makes her purchasing decision. Daniel tells her the apples are $2 a kilo. Emma instantly, almost robotically replies, "Great, I'll take 1 kilo."
She makes a quick decision which keeps the dialogue moving.
It's not just quick, it's thoughtless. There is no pause to consider the budget, no physical comparison with the price of the pears sitting right next to the apples, no reaction to whether $2 a kilo is expensive or cheap. The text portrays economic exchange as an automatic reflex, rather than a human decision. It completely divorces the language of commerce from the psychology of commerce.
It portrays it efficiently because the text understands its own purpose. The primary objective in that specific moment isn't to teach budgeting or economic theory.
No, but
It is to strictly link the inquiry, how much are these, with a metric response, $2 a kilo, and a subsequent action, I'll take 1 kilo, which actually leads us to our third major area of focus today, spatial mapping and how these characters interact with their physical environment.
right, the geography of the supermarket.
Precisely. The text builds an essential cognitive map for the learner. It moves with incredible elegance from broad conceptual categories to specific physical locations. Emma and Daniel establish the necessity of milk, bread, eggs, and fruit. These are broad noun categories. But Daniel then grounds them physically, directing Emma to the dairy section and further refining it to near the cheese and yogurt. This brilliantly anchors abstract language in concrete spatial realities. It teaches the learner how to categorize the physical world linguistically.
Look, I won't deny the absolute utility of categorical vocabulary. Knowing the term dairy section is undeniably useful when navigating a store.
Exactly.
But I deeply question the deceptively neat mapping the text employs here. Aisle 5, just around the corner. It forces a perfectly linear, sequential narrative onto an inherently non-linear, profoundly chaotic experience.
Supermarkets are organized by category. The text reflects that organization.
Modern supermarkets are explicitly engineered by behavioral psychologists to be confusing. They put the milk at the very back of the store specifically so you have to walk past thousands of unrelated items to get there. They change the aisles to break your habits. The experience is inherently chaotic. By imposing this perfectly rote categorization where everything is exactly where it rationally should be, and Daniel can map it flawlessly in his head, the text prioritizes a theoretical grid over dynamic adaptive language use. It's teaching the learner to navigate a store that doesn't exist.
But the fact that the physical supermarket is engineered to be confusing is exactly why the learner needs a rigid linguistic map. The text is providing a psychological anchor in the chaos. When a learner walks into that overwhelming environment, fluorescent lights, background music, people rushing past, their sensory processing is already maxed out.
Sure.
When Emma learns that apples are quantified by weight, $2 a kilo, and immediately enacts a purchase based on that metric, the text is anchoring the vocabulary in a tangible universal standard. It genuinely doesn't matter if the physical store layout is intentionally confusing. The language of weight, price, and location provides the cognitive tools to conquer that confusion. The structural predictability of the dialogue is the literal armor
the learner wears into the chaotic environment.
Armor, perhaps, but extremely rigid armor that makes it difficult to turn your head or adapt. Let's look closely at how that spatial mapping actually plays out in the dialogue. When Daniel says the bread is on aisle 5, just around the corner, he is using a combination of absolute geography, aisle 5, and relative geography around the corner. But because the interaction is entirely one-sided, with Emma just passively accepting this perfection, the learner never sees how to clarify spatial directions.
She accepts it because the directions are clear.
But around the corner is highly subjective. Which corner? At the end of the aisle or near the end cap display? Emma just says, "Thanks." She doesn't say, "Wait, which corner?" She doesn't ask, "Do you mean past the frozen foods?" She doesn't ask for any clarification whatsoever. The text completely fails to model how to repair a breakdown in spatial communication. And frankly, knowing how to clarify a confusing direction is a far more vital skill for a language learner than perfectly memorizing the phrase dairy section.
Okay, I completely disagree that this is a failure of the text. The absence of a communication breakdown is a deliberate, highly effective pedagogical choice. To model repairing a communication breakdown, you first have to model what successful communication actually sounds like.
I suppose.
You must establish what correct looks like in the learner's brain before you can safely explore incorrect or confused. Emma says thanks because as she has received the precise data she required, the interaction is complete and the syntactic loop is closed cleanly for the learner observing them.
I understand the desire to close the syntactic loop, but we have to consider the cumulative effect of a learner consuming dialogue after dialogue where the interaction is always this perfect. It creates a well-documented phenomenon that linguists call the illusion of competence.
The idea that you think you know more than you do because the testing environment is too easy?
Exactly. The learner can recite the lines flawlessly in the safety of the classroom. They can input the linguistic coins into the vending machine perfectly. But it's an illusion. It's like teaching someone to fly a plane in a perfect vacuum.
A vacuum?
Yeah, it works beautifully on paper. All the aerodynamic equations balance out. But the moment you introduce actual atmospheric drag, the cashier mumbling, the background noise, a confusing store layout, being asked for a loyalty card, the wings get completely torn off. The text hasn't taught them how to adapt to atmospheric drag. It has only taught them how to perform in a vacuum.
But you absolutely must learn to operate the controls in a simulator before you are thrown into a hurricane. The dialogue provides that simulator. It's a controlled environment where the physics of the language can be isolated and mastered.
A simulator still simulates wind. This text simulates a world without weather.
Okay, well, let's pull back and look at where we stand on this text as a whole. I maintain that the predictable, structured nature of this dialogue provides an indispensable, high-yield toolkit for the language learner. By deliberately stripping out the friction, the ambiguity, and edge cases, the text gives the learner a clear, unobstructed view of the mechanical relationship between a question like, "Are there any discounts?" and the affirmative delivery of practical information.
Right.
It doesn't need to simulate the psychological complexity of a real shopping trip because its goal is lexical acquisition. It is a masterful utilitarian blueprint for essential economic transactions.
And I maintain that prioritizing these sterile, frictionless exchanges risks leaving learners fundamentally ill-equipped for the nuanced realities of actual human communication. When we strip away the ambiguity, the negotiation of meaning, and the shared uncertainty that actually defines how humans interact, we aren't just simplifying the language, we are misrepresenting what it means to converse. The omniscient interlocutor in Daniel and the vending machine predictability of the cashier's responses create a linguistic utopia that simply doesn't exist outside the pages of a textbook.
Yet, despite our profound disagreement on the architecture of the dialogue, I think we have found some very crucial points of convergence today regarding the specific lexical items. We both agree that the targeted expressions highlighted by the source, "How much is this? Is this on sale? Can I pay by card?" are absolutely fundamental to the domain of retail transactions. No one is arguing that these aren't the exact right phrases for a learner to internalize.
Absolutely. The target vocabulary itself is unimpeachable. Those are the exact tools you need in your toolbox. Our thoughtful disagreement remains entirely centered on the scaffolding surrounding those phrases. The question remains whether stripping away conversational ambiguity serves as a necessary practical stepping stone to reduce cognitive load, as you argue, or acts as a structural flaw that hobbles the learner's true communicative competence and adaptability, as I argue.
It's a debate that forces us to reflect on the broader value of analyzing these kinds of instructional texts. The dialogues we create for learners do much more than just shape their vocabulary or their syntax. They fundamentally construct their foundational expectations of human interaction, of social contracts, and of how economic exchanges are supposed to look and feel.
They absolutely do. They tell the learner what the world is supposed to look like before they even step out the door. And it's up to us and our listeners to critically examine whether that picture should be a flawless, frictionless ideal designed for rapid acquisition or a messy, authentic reality designed for true resilience. We encourage you to explore the source material further and draw your own conclusions on this delicate balance between simplicity and realism.
We started today by talking about practicing conversations perfectly in your head, only to face the chaotic reality of actual human speech. Perhaps the ultimate takeaway is realizing that while the idealized script is where our confidence begins, the true test of fluency and of human connection is what happens when the script finally runs out. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.